This is StoryRobot. Welcome to r/RegularRevenge. Our first story of today is, Almost Make Me Infertile. I'll Ruin Your Relationships. A long time ago I was a young man in an all-boys secondary school. I was about 14 for any international readers, and my friends and I were regularly bullied by a large group of older guys. Being typically nerdy boys, we were prime candidates for bullying. The only saving grace was that we were quite a large group ourselves, so no one person was targeted more than any other. Unfortunately, that didn't matter as the bullying was brutal. On our school grounds there was a small cabin that belonged to the local Boy Scouts that we used to hang out around on our lunch break. One day we had a run-in with the bullies when they tried to steal our football. For daring to not hand it over, I was singled out for punishment, so I was grabbed by 4 of them, one each grabbing an arm and a leg, and carried round the corner to a small courtyard with a flagpole in the middle. After a few punches for struggling, I was swung backwards and forwards a few times before being swung legs apart in full force into the pole. Any attempts to describe how painful that was wouldn't do it justice. Thankfully, one of my friends had made a run for a teacher, and they were spotted coming towards the group by a lookout before they had chance to take another swing, and they dropped me a leg at it. I was carried to the school office nauseous and in tears, and my mum was called. She found me with an ice pack between my legs and gulas the size are oranges. As she was talking to the receptionist and teacher, my friends ran up to me and passed me a mobile phone. I was confused as I didn't own one, and it was at a time when they weren't nearly as common as they are now, and they didn't even have games on them yet. It was an early model Nokia with an LCD screen. I looked at my friend and asked whose it was. He told me one of the bullies had dropped it as they ran off, and he thought that I should have it as a small way of getting back at him. I took the phone and left with my mum. That evening I was in my bedroom feeling sorry for myself, and I'd forgotten about the phone in my blazer pocket until I heard it go off. I took it out and saw he'd received a text message from his girlfriend. This was before phones had sophisticated locks and the bully hadn't set a passcode. I had no idea which bully had owned the phone, but I had his name now at least. I decided to mess with him. I was off school the next day, but when I went back in I talked to my friends about it and we came up with a plan. One of my friends with a mobile phone was going to message him pretending to be a guy he'd met recently, and we were going to make it look like he'd been having a relationship with him and meeting in secret. We carried on sending messages for the rest of the week, and I was also replying to his girlfriend, although I deliberately made my replies shorter and less intimate than they had been before I got hold of the phone. I'd arranged for my bully to meet his girlfriend in the local town that Saturday, but was planning to stand her up, obviously, while simultaneously having my friend text the phone about ditching her to go over to his instead. I replied agreeing and said I'd tell her I couldn't make it. I didn't. I'd waited in town where we were supposed to meet and saw a girl walk up and wait for a bit. She then got out her phone and typed a text. The phone went off in my pocket. I left it alone. She waited a few more minutes and texted me again. This time I walked around the corner out of sight and messaged her back asking who this was. She flipped out and shouted at me for messing her around. I told her that I had found this phone on the floor of the bus station in that town, and if she knew the owner I'd come and give it to her so she could give it back to the owner if she was nearby. She told me where she was, and I waited 5 minutes before walking around the corner and looking around for her. Eventually, through texting, we found each other and I gave her the phone. She thanked me and we went our separate ways. On Monday I told my friends that we'd pulled it off and we just had to wait and see what happened. It wasn't long into the week when gossip started spreading through the school. The bully's girlfriend had read his messages, it seemed, and had dumped him for having a gay affair. On top of that, she'd done it by going to his house on Sunday and calling him out in front of his parents, who it turns out, were not fans of that sort of thing at all. When he denied it, she pulled out the phone and read out message after message. His claims he lost it over a week ago were ignored and I was not suspected. In response, his parents pretty much disowned him and he was only saved by his uncle, who was a little more understanding. He lost contact with a lot of his friends as his uncle's house was a lot further away, so hanging out after school or at the weekend was almost impossible, and his preference for men was so well known by now that no girl seemed interested. As far as I know, his parents never took him back and he moved to London to go to university to escape his reputation at home. I had only expected to break him and his girlfriend up, but that was an unexpected bonus. I'd say it went too far, but having your nuts smashed off a flagpole tends to harden you to the plight of your bully. Our final story of today is, Boss Fires Me with Questionable Ethics. I turn her career upside down. Many years ago, I accepted a job in an industry I was trying to break into for many years before. This was my first professional job, and I was still pretty naive on the business dynamics, meaning I didn't play the way they wanted me to. For many of the people I worked with, this was fine. My boss, Nina, was something else. I learned pretty quickly to just go with the flow and remain under her radar. This worked for a time before I couldn't handle it anymore. I'll get to that shortly. Nina prided herself on getting things handled when nobody else can. This was likely because of how relentless she was. She believed she was friends with everybody, but I think most people were doing exactly like I was, trying to keep her happy so she didn't get worse. One such event was the placement of a new temporary, only in the fact that the company did not want to build a new structure building. There were many questions raised about the legality of the placement, but Nina worked her magic and the building was placed right where she wanted it. This was ideal for her since she could pick the office with the best view. Keep in mind that this trailer was maybe 2 steps above a festival porta potty. The way she spoke about it, you'd think she was describing the Sistine Chapel. As time went on, I learned why this placement was so important to her. Her husband's company was contracted to perform the work. Ethics be damned. This did not sit well with me, and I started noticing a trend in her contractor preferences. It always leaned towards those that used her husband's company. I tried to address this with her personally, which would only result in her using her experience to teach me that there are many aspects I do not understand for selecting contractors. I tried to bring this to the attention of people that could do something about it, but they all seemed to fear her as well. This facility has a lot of safety rules, and for good reason with the number of hazards around. However, people had a habit of assuming a rule for a specific location of the facility applied to the entire facility. One being facial hair. Specific areas required respirators, so facial hair was not allowed. I did not work in any of those areas, nor anywhere remotely close to them. I still shaved regularly, but I wanted a bit of growth for my wedding. Months prior I asked Nina if it was okay to grow it out for a month prior and she agreed. We discussed it every 1 to 2 weeks until that month prior. The first Monday I showed up with a week's worth of growth, she lost her mind and began screaming at me. I stood up for myself without getting angry and she continued to scream at me. Eventually, I relented and tried to defuse the situation. While I was able to get the safety department to approve my beard, I still received a message that I was youthfully defiant from my boss. From that point forward, all conversations were strictly professional from me. Little, no emotion, to the point, nothing personal. For the following months, Nina became much more critical of my work. Directions she sent me in email and either matched or exceeded her requirements were immediately rejected, and I had to recreate them with a new set of requirements. Literally, math became a point of contention. Nothing complex, either. Basic arithmetic was scrutinized to the point that I had to explain, and this is not a joke, 8 plus 1 is 9. My days were obviously numbered. Earlier this year I was rushed to the hospital for a possible heart attack. I'm early 30s, by the way. Ultimately, it was determined to be because of major work stress, and my diet, since I was forbidden from lunch in the end. After a few days in the hospital, my wife is given notification that I am being fired. To this day I have not been given a reason for being fired. The problem for my, now former, boss is that I have plenty of free time now. The first part started when coworkers began reaching out to see how my health was and I'd subtly mention being fired. If they asked, I'd give as much detail without seeming malicious. This information started spreading quickly and people began to put their walls around Nina. Evidently, I had built a decent relationship with my peers. My next step was to call the corporate ethics hotline and leave an anonymous message about her blatant conflicts of interest with applicable project names and rough dates. Making sure to mention her husband and his company by name. The first sign that this call was effective came 2 weeks later when I learned that her Sistine Chapel had been condemned for being placed on a fault line and had to be vacated immediately. She was forced into a basement office with 2 other people. The good news for her is that she doesn't have to spend much time in that new office, though. She is spending more than 50% of her time in a remote location in Alaska that requires, at minimum, 2 days of travel one way. Additionally, she has been denied a replacement for me. This means she must perform all duties I did on top of her normal tasks. Not a great deal when you're salaried. In the end, she has alienated herself and is receiving no support. She travels mostly on her own time and spends more time in an airport working than in her office. Meanwhile, I have accepted a great job that has significantly reduced my blood pressure. The last 5 years before retirement are going to be rough. I didn't do much, but isn't the best revenge to live your best life? Thank you for watching. Error. Problem detected. Not enough subscribers. Please subscribe, like and comment.